The World Today. The Columbia Broadcasting System now presents a summary of news to this moment on the war with Japan and other world fighting fronts, reports by CBS correspondents in the war zones, direct by Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic Shortwave Radio, and the minute-by-minute developments as received by Columbia's newsroom here in New York. Tonight, John Daly will call in Albert Warner from Washington and Bob Trout from London, and we will take you to the West Coast for direct reports from the Pacific war zones. And now, John Daly.
First, the highlights in the war news before taking you to Washington for the direct report on important developments there. Berlin reports Japanese troops have crossed Thailand's border and have started a drive on the Burma Road. The report that Japanese troops have landed on Lubang Island in the Philippines is not confirmed. The island of Guam is reported still in American hands. Manila has had new air raid alarms, but no bombings are reported, and it's believed fifth column action may have been responsible. The latest CBS message from Honolulu says Hawaii is calm and morale high. The latest claims of the Japanese High Command reported in propaganda broadcasts from Tokyo describe destructive air raids on Malaya and a land attack on both Singapore and the British colony of Hong Kong. But the British say all these attacks are being resisted successfully. No confirmation yet as to whether the Nazis intend to declare war on the United States or whether Hitler will address the Reichstag as rumored. Russia seems to be doing better in the Moscow front, and Berlin makes no claims at all. Those are the highlights in the news to this moment. Now to our national capital for the report of Albert Warner. We take you now to Washington.
The State Department announces that a considerable body of Mexican troops will pass through the United States beginning tomorrow to reinforce the defense of the Mexican state of Lower California. This is a striking instance of cooperation in hemispheric defense, the department declares. The president chooses to bring Germany squarely into the center of the picture of world aggression. In his address to the people at 10 o'clock tonight, telling of the war with Japan, his theme will be the Nazi pattern. This afternoon, by proclamation, the president classified Germans and Italians, as well as Japanese in this country, as enemy aliens. The president proclaims an invasion is threatened upon the territory of the United States by Germany. The Attorney General has rounded up 1,500 enemy aliens, and a third of them are Germans or Italians. It would be no surprise here if Germany declares war. The President and the Defense Board, SPAB, agree on an all-out effort. Their program includes planned operations 7 full days a week and the building of still more plants. Their program includes also a 50% cut in civilian use of all metals, but in foodstuffs there will be no shortage, the President told us at his press conference, nor in lipstick. The President is considering calling a national conference of labor and management for a voluntary program of cooperation. Vice President Wallace was asked if the new Victory production program would involve an expenditure of $150 billion. He said, "We are not discussing details." Official quarters wave aside the air raid scare on the Atlantic coast as a phony, but there is the utmost seriousness in the search for a Japanese airplane carrier in the Pacific. The House Military Affairs Committee rushes favorable report on the bill to let all American soldiers be sent anywhere. Both Senate and House debate the conduct of the war. There is criticism of Navy Secretary Knox and the Navy Command for the blows suffered in Hawaii. The House Naval Committee requests Knox and Admiral Stark to appear before it tomorrow, but Chairman Vinson told the House this is no time to rock the boat. There was a narrower entrance and a closer scrutiny for the newsmen going to the President's press conference. In a gray striped suit and his cigarette holder clenched in his teeth, the President waited patiently. What were the Secret Service men doing, frisking us, he asked. He told of news from General MacArthur in the Philippines, of a Japanese bombing attack on Clark Field. He discussed the problem of information. There must be 2 conditions on its disclosure, he said. First, that it be accurate. Second, that in giving it out, it does not give aid and comfort to the enemy. Someone asked, does that mean no bad news is to be given out? But the President merely stuck to his formula. Chinese newspapermen are having a hard time. One appeared at the White House with a sign in big letters on his coat lapel. It read, "Chinese reporter, not Japanese, please." We return you now to New York.
And now for the news of the Far East, we take you to San Francisco.
This is William Winter speaking in San Francisco. San Francisco experienced its first taste of air raid warning last night. And when a second and a third alarm sounded during the night, San Franciscans seem to have become used to living in a city at war. Today, people seem to be going about their business as usual, except that the conversations in restaurants and street corners concern the latest reports of Japan's attack in the Pacific, and people talk proudly about how they had remained calm through the night. A few minutes ago, the mayor of the city held a meeting of all civilian defense authorities in his office, and arrangements were made to broadcast air raid warnings over all radio stations in this area before they go off the air in the event of emergency. Instructions for air raid precaution were announced. People are to remain in their houses, stay off the streets wherever possible. Motorists hearing air raid alarms are to pull their cars to the curb, turn out the auto lights, and go to the nearest shelter. Householders were instructed to keep bags of sand handy around the house and keep bathtubs filled with water and keep garden hoses connected to faucets, just in case. At the meeting, Lieutenant General DeWitt, commanding the 4th Army of the United States, announced that last night's blackout of San Francisco was unsatisfactory. Death and destruction at any moment is now a possibility for an indefinite time as far as this coast is concerned, he said. Last night's air raid warning was not a practice warning. Enemy planes were over this area last night for an indefinite period, and why they did not bomb San Francisco, only God knows. Mayor LaGuardia and his Assistant Administrator of Civilian Defense, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, are in Los Angeles now conferring with officials, and there is word that they're expected soon in San Francisco. In San Diego, California, a group of Japanese, German, and Italian aliens are still in custody in local jails. Sacramento, the state capital, reports that the recruiting picture has changed overnight, and from border to border, from Canada to Mexico, draftees who once sought exemption now are clamoring to get into uniform. In Fresno, California, 2 Japanese were arrested. Their automobiles and elaborate motion picture and sound equipment were seized by police. And back in San Francisco, the Pan American Anzac Clipper, with its crew of 11 men, has landed safely this afternoon at Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay. The captain of the ship, Captain Harry Turner, related that he had landed his 17 passengers, including the Premier of Burma, U Saw, and his aide, U Tin Tut, at an undisclosed Hawaiian port. We left California on December the 6th for Singapore via Honolulu, said Captain Turner. As we approached Honolulu Sunday morning, our radio man picked up the information that unidentified planes were attacking Honolulu. The passengers did not know what was happening, but were advised after we landed. They were made comfortable at the hotel, and then they listened to President Roosevelt's speech. The Clipper then was refueled with some 4,300 gallons of gasoline. Its crew of 11 boarded the ship, and we returned to San Francisco without incident. Word has just come that some 91 Japanese, 60 German, and 16 Italian nationals have been taken into custody in Northern California by the FBI, and instructions have come from Washington, D.C. that no further Germans and Italians will be admitted to American citizenship until further notice. At this time, we will attempt to call in our correspondent from Batavia. This is CBS in San Francisco calling Batavia. Go ahead, Batavia.
Go ahead, Batavia.
Hello, CBS. This is John Raleigh speaking from Batavia, Java. And of war and blackout passed quietly and without incident. Although local newspapers complained yesterday that the partial blackout had been too severe the first night, it was even more thorough these last 12 hours. 2 cars were to be seen on the street. Apparently, people had gone out for a drive last evening just to see how it felt to be driving around Batavia in a darkness filled with grim possibilities. They found out, and now only those who have to be abroad creep slowly down the darkened avenues in cars with shaded head and tail lights. Taxis in this capital city are at a premium. Anticipating war, everyone who could afford to rent or buy a car has done so. Many cab companies discovered that they had turned into car dealers at their own prices. Those that already had automobiles are indeed the favored folk of this town. As in Holland, bicycles are tremendously popular here, but pumping along in a pit of Stygian darkness has its perils. Why, what few cyclists that are out at night aren't all killed is beyond me. Cycle lamps are covered with blue paper, and most have only the reflector discs on the rear fenders. These, of course, cannot be seen as there is no beam to illuminate them. One comes upon a pair of bikes pedaling side by side, and only a quick swerve saves car driver and cyclist from a nasty accident by inches. Yesterday I made it a point to get around to several Dutch clubs. I wanted to listen to what the Hollanders are saying and feeling among themselves. comment was not greatly varied. Dutchmen are solidly behind Netherlands East Indian War effort. They are immensely proud that their Governor-General was so prompt in declaring war on Japan. This is one time we have not procrastinated on an important issue, several of the good burghers remarked. General mobilization in the Indies are rather bad words for the gathering of Dutch armies. One assumes that masses of untrained men are admitted to the kindly ministrations of drill sergeants and camp life for the first time. Here, that is hardly true. Every able-bodied man in the NEI, for more than a year, has received military instruction practically and otherwise. A single week out of each month has been devoted to military service in the reserve. Men who had never worn uniforms a year ago spent 6 months learning the art of war within the year past. The only exception is the newly conscripted native Indonesian soldiery, which even so has had some training since being inducted into the Army a few weeks ago. This is John Raleigh of Batavia, Java. I return you to CBS in New York.
That was a report from Batavia, and this is William Winter in San Francisco returning you to New York.
Trout reporting. Go ahead, London.
London is not blinded by the fighting in the Pacific sector to the fact that there are many other sectors. In Russia, the Moscow radio broadcast a special announcement that Russian troops have recaptured Tikhvin in the north, and we heard that broadcast in London. In Libya, the main fighting is apparently still going on between Tobruk and Bir el Gobi. Mobile British columns are also operating toward the enemy's lines of communications west of Tobruk, but here British action is limited by the presence at El Adam of a big enemy force of all arms. British Coastal Command planes attacked a large enemy supply ship off the Dutch coast and left the vessel on fire. The British National Service bill to mobilize fully Britain's man and woman power was read and discussed in Commons today, but there was no vote. Since the Axis struck openly at America, I've been talking to a great many Englishmen. But tonight, I had dinner with a large group of American reporters and correspondents who have been covering the war in Europe, only to find that the latest war news is now being made in America. These men and women who have watched the principal nations of the world drawn into the Second World War one by one were united tonight by two emotions. The first is a keen longing to be at home in this critical period. The second is a feeling of deep disappointment. Year after year, these American reporters have roamed the world to get the true story and to send it home. And now apparently the United States has been the victim of a sudden attack, and we here have suffered heavily. American reporters feel their work has been a failure. They have told the story year after year, but their fellow Americans would not pay any attention. And that's the brief story from London.
The east coast of the United States had its air raid scare today following last night's alarms on the west coast. Before the resulting confusion was over, United States interceptor planes had flown out to sea. Naval bases were put on the alert, shipyard workers were ordered to evacuate, thousands of school children were sent home, and air raid sirens sounded in New York City and at other points. Then came official statements that the precautions had been merely a full-dress test of air raid defenses, while other sources advanced conflicting reasons for the widespread alarms. According to one theory, which is given credence by the Associated Press, it all started when a private citizen made a telephone call to Army headquarters in New York. He inquired about a radio broadcast from Washington, which carried the report that enemy bombers had been sighted 2 hours distant from the Atlantic coast. Following this call, and possibly through misunderstanding, Air Force headquarters at Mitchell Field, Long Island, immediately sent out interceptor planes. Later, the War Department in Washington stated the report of approaching bombers had at no time been official, but said all Air Force stations had been put on the alert because of the war emergency. And that's the world today.
The next special news broadcast will be heard over many of these stations at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and at 10 p.m. CBS will broadcast President Roosevelt's first wartime speech to the people of the nation. Columbia will continue to interrupt its regularly scheduled programs to bring you the latest news. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.